October 1717, the Paraiba River. Felipe Pedroso held two pieces of broken clay in his weathered hands, a body, a head, both pulled from the river, hours apart, kilometers apart, by nets that should never have caught them. He fit them together, the breaks aligned perfectly. His companions, Domingos and Joao, stared in silence. These were fishermen who knew water, who knew weight, who knew what rivers do to things. And what they were holding was impossible. A 5-kilogram statue rising from a riverbed 20 feet deep. A tiny head, light as an apple, caught in a net designed to let such things slip through, separated by kilometers of rushing current, found in sequence on the same day by the same 3 men. This was not chance. This is the story of how impossibility became Brazil's greatest devotion.
Welcome to Catholic Hearts. Subscribe now to support this channel and discover more extraordinary stories that shaped our Catholic faith. The year is 1717. The place, the Paraiba River Valley in colonial Brazil, a region of dense forest and scattered settlements along one of the country's great waterways. The town of Guaratinguetá sits on the banks of the Paraíba do Sul, a river that runs wide and deep through the province of São Paulo, carrying trade, connecting villages, feeding the land. In October, the river swells with seasonal rains. The current runs strong. 3 men made their living from these waters: Domingos Garcia, Joao Alves, and Felipe Pedroso. They were related by blood and bound by the rhythm of the river, casting nets at dawn, hauling fish to market, supporting families in the simple, back-breaking way that fishermen have always lived. These were not educated men. They could not read or write, but they knew their trade. They understood the Paraiba's moods, its depths, its dangers. In mid-October of that year, a visitor arrived in Guaratinguetá. Don Pedro de Almeida y Portugal, the Count of Assumar, governor of the captaincy of Minas Gerais. He was traveling with his retinue, officials, soldiers, servants, making his way through the valley on official business. The Count would remain in Guaratinguetá for 15 days, and like any nobleman of his station, he expected to be entertained. A banquet was planned in his honor, tables prepared, wine brought up from storage. But there was a problem. It was a Friday. The Portuguese had brought their faith across the Atlantic, churches in every settlement, Jesuit missions pushing into the interior, and above all, a devotion they held more sacred than any other: Our Lady of the Conception, the Immaculate One. In their language, Nossa Senhora da Conceição. Decades earlier, in 1646, the King of Portugal himself had knelt before her image and made an extraordinary vow. If she granted him victory in his war for independence against Spain, he would crown her Queen of Portugal and all its territories. He won. And from that day forward, no Portuguese monarch wore the crown again. They left it on a cushion beside the throne, acknowledging that the true queen was Mary. Brazil, as a Portuguese colony, already belonged to her, and the Portuguese were obedient Catholics. Friday meant abstinence from meat. The law of the church was clear. Even a governor's banquet table could not serve beef or pork on a Friday. So the order went out. Fish was needed, and the job fell to 3 fishermen: Domingos Garcia, Joao Alves, and Felipe Pedroso. From the beginning, nothing went right. They cast their nets in the usual places, the spots where fish congregated, the calm pockets where the current eased, the shallows near the reeds. Empty. They tried again, and again. The nets came up dripping and bare, again and again, the rope rough in their hands, the sun climbing higher. This was not unexpected. October was a difficult season for fishing. The river's conditions were unfavorable. The water too high, the current too strong, the fish scattered and wary. Any experienced fisherman knew this, but knowing didn't make the nets any heavier. Hours passed. The morning stretched into afternoon. They were under pressure. This wasn't fishing for their own families or for the local market. This was for the governor's table. Failure meant embarrassment. Perhaps worse. Felipe pulled in another empty net and shook his head. Domingos scanned water, looking for any sign, a ripple, a shadow that might indicate a school of fish. Nothing. Finally, in the way that simple men have always prayed when the world becomes too heavy, they stopped their work, they bowed their heads, and they asked for help. The prayer was not elaborate. They had no formal words, no memorized petitions, just a fisherman's plea. Our Lady, help us, intercede for us. We need your help. Then they picked up the nets and tried again. They rowed to Porto Correa Leyte. It was not an ideal fishing spot. The current there was known to be treacherous, fast and unpredictable. Fishermen generally avoided it, but they were desperate. João Alves cast the net. The weighted edges spread wide, then sank. He waited, felt the pull, and then something.
João hauled the rope hand over hand, feeling the weight resist. For one bright moment, he thought they had succeeded. Fish! Finally, fish! But when the net broke the surface, there was no silver flash, no thrashing, no life. Just a dark object, still and strange, tangled in the mesh. They pulled it into the boat. A statue. The body of a small statue. Headless. The neck ended in a jagged, broken edge. It measured about 36 centimeters from base to the shattered neck, roughly 14 inches. Small. But when Felipe lifted it, he felt the weight immediately. Heavy. Not the hollow lightness of wood. This was terracotta, baked clay, thick-walled and dense. The statue weighed nearly 5 kilograms, 11 pounds of solid, fired earth. The surface was dark, almost black. Any paint or glaze that had once covered it was gone, stripped away entirely. Only the bare clay remained, stained by time and silt. Domingos turned it over in his hands. The craftsmanship was clear, even in its damaged state. Folded hands, the drape of a robe, a rounded protrusion at the belly, a pregnant woman. At the base, barely visible beneath accumulated grime, the curve of a crescent moon and the small carved head of an angel. It was a religious image, clearly sacred, but broken and discarded. There was a tradition among Catholics of that time, one that persists even today. When a blessed image broke beyond repair, you did not throw it away like common trash. That would be desecration. Instead, you returned it to the elements. You buried it in the earth, or you gave it to the water. The river was a grave for broken holy things. This statue had been in the river a long time. That much was obvious. The complete absence of paint, the deep discoloration of the clay. This hadn't fallen in last week or last month. Years, perhaps decades. Any other day they would have thrown it back, tossed it back, continued fishing. But they didn't. Why? Here's what stopped them. Felipe held the statue and looked at the water. He knew the Paraíba. He had fished these waters since boyhood. He understood what the river did to objects, how it moved them, where it kept them. The Paraíba at Porto Correa Leyte runs deep, too deep for their casting nets to touch bottom. In some places, the river plunges 10, 15, even 20 feet down, and the current there is strong, known among fishermen as dangerous. Fast water, unpredictable eddies. An object this heavy does not float. Think about it. What 5 kilograms of terracotta means in water. Clay is denser than water, roughly twice as dense. The moment the statue entered the river, whether thrown, dropped, or swept away in some long-ago flood, it sank straight down immediately. And once an object that heavy reaches the riverbed, it stays there. The current moves horizontally, not vertically. Water pushes things downstream, rolls them along the bottom, but it doesn't lift them.
especially not something this dense, this settled. Over time, years in this case, the silt accumulates. Mud covers. The river buries its dead. Yet their net, a casting net designed to fish the surface and middle depths, had somehow caught it. That made no sense. Felipe looked at João looked at Domingos. These were not educated men, but they were not fools. They knew weight. They knew depth. They knew the Paraíba intimately. This statue should not have been in their net. It should have been on the riverbed, buried, lost, unreachable. But here it was, heavy and dark and broken in their hands. Felipe wrapped it carefully in a cloth. "We keep it," he said. They did not yet understand why. Only later would they realize this was already the first miracle.
They continued down the river. The boat rocked gently as they rowed, moving with the current toward home. The wrapped statue sat between them, a strange and silent passenger. Their village, the cluster of houses where they lived, where their families waited, was several kilometers downstream, near a place called Ponte Alta. But before reaching home, they would pass through Porto Itaguaçu, another anchorage point along the river's course. Several kilometers. Let me make you see what that distance means. The Paraíba do Sul is not a stream. It is not a creek you can wade across or skip a stone over. It is a major river, wide enough that a voice shouted from one bank will not clearly reach the other. In October, swollen with seasonal rains, it runs powerful and fast. The current that day would have been flowing at perhaps 6 kilometers per hour, maybe faster in the center channel. Objects in moving water do not stay still. They tumble, they drift, they disperse. Imagine dropping 2 objects into that current at the same spot. One heavy, 5 kilograms, like the body of the statue. One light, say 250 grams, about half a pound. They do not sink at the same rate. The heavy one plummets. The light one might drift, might catch in an eddy, might float briefly before eventually sinking. They follow different paths through the water column, different speeds, different trajectories. Now, imagine those 2 objects did not even enter the water at the same point. Imagine they were separated by distance to begin with. And imagine they have been underwater, not for hours, but for years. What are the odds? What are the actual mathematical odds that a fisherman's net would catch them both? Not just catch them, but catch them separately, hours apart, kilometers apart, in sequence. The fishermen were not thinking about any of this. They were thinking about the governor's banquet, about the empty nets, the wasted morning, and the embarrassment of returning with nothing. They still had no fish. At Porto Itaguaçu, João Alves prepared to cast the net again. The afternoon sun was lowering. Time was running out. He threw the net in a wide, practiced arc. The weighted edges spread, opened, began to sink. He let the net settle, then started to pull. He felt resistance, a pull, heavier than water, lighter than the body they had found before. Hand over hand, he hauled the net up. When it broke the surface, he saw it immediately. A head.
It was tiny. Not metaphorically small, actually physically tiny. The head of the statue measured perhaps 9 centimeters across at its widest point, 3 inches. You could hold it in the palm of one hand with room to spare. The weight, 250 grams, half a pound, about the weight of a small apple. Domingos reached into the net and lifted it out. Water dripped from the smooth clay surface. He turned it over, examining it. The features were delicate and precise. A small face with closed, downcast eyes. A nose, mouth, the curve of a chin, all rendered with care by whoever had sculpted this decades ago before it was broken and lost. The neck ended in the same kind of jagged break as the body they had found kilometers upstream. A clean fracture, not worn smooth with water, but sharp and sudden. This had been whole once, and then it had been broken. João looked at the net.
He looked at the head in Domingo's hand. Something was wrong. A casting net is not made of fine cloth. The mesh is woven with gaps, intentionally so. You want the small fish to slip through. You want to catch only fish of a certain size. The holes in the net are measured for this purpose, wide enough to let the unwanted escape. This head was 3 inches across, smooth, rounded, light. It should have slipped right through the mesh. Even if the net had closed around it by some chance, the head was small enough, light enough, slippery enough to simply fall back out when lifted. But it hadn't. Felipe unwrapped the cloth from the body they had pulled up at Puerto Correalete. He held the 2 pieces side by side. The break matched. Not approximately, not close enough, perfectly. The jagged edge of the neck, the jagged edge of the head, they aligned like 2 pieces of a puzzle, fitting together as if they had been carved as one, which, of course, they had been once. There was no discussion, no debate about odds or probability. These men had lived their entire lives on this river. They had seen what the Paraiba did to things, how it scattered debris, how it buried, moved, dispersed, destroyed. They understood with the certainty that comes from a lifetime of experience that what they were holding was impossible. Let me be clear about what had just happened. The statue was terracotta, baked clay, dense and heavy. From the moment it entered the water, intact or broken, it sank. That is not opinion. That is physics. Objects denser than water sink in water. The body weighed 5 kilograms. That mass, in this river this deep, drops straight to the bottom and stays there. Silt accumulates over it. The river forgets it. The head weighed 250 grams. Lighter, yes, but still dense clay, still sinking. And small. Small enough to wedge between rocks, catch in roots, tumble into any countless crevices and hiding places a riverbed provides. The river was deep. 10, 15, 20 feet in places. Their nets fished the upper water, 6 feet down at most. The current was strong. Anything on the riverbed would be pushed downstream, rolled along the bottom, not lifted toward the surface. And the distance, kilometers between Puerto Correalete and Puerto Itaguaçu, kilometers of fast-moving water. For one piece to reach their net was extraordinary. For both pieces, separated by that distance, to be caught hours apart in succession, mathematically, it approached impossibility. But there was more. The statue was underwater for years. Long enough for every trace of paint to be scoured away, long enough for the clay to absorb the river's color and turn nearly black. Years of current, years of silt, years of the river doing what rivers do, moving, churning, burying. In that time, the 2 pieces could have been carried tens of kilometers apart. They could have been separated by the width of the river. They could have been buried under layers of sediment that would keep them hidden until the Paraiba itself dried up or changed course. Instead, both pieces rose. Both pieces found the nets of 3 fishermen on the same afternoon. Hours apart, yes, but still the same men. Felipe held the head above the body. He lowered it slowly. The break aligned. He pressed gently. The pieces fit together, head to neck, with perfect precision. The image was complete. A woman. Hands folded in prayer, belly rounded with child, a crescent moon beneath her feet, a small carved angel at the base. They recognized the iconography immediately. Every Portuguese church, every chapel in colonial Brazil had images like this. Our Lady of the Conception, the Immaculate One, Mary conceived without sin, pregnant with Christ still in her womb. But this one was different. This one was broken. This one was dark. Blackened by the river, stripped of its beauty, returned to raw clay. And this one had come from the depths in a way that defied every natural law these men understood. Nossa Señora está conosco, Felipe said quietly. Our Lady is with us. They did not yet know what it meant, but they knew with absolute certainty that something beyond nature had just occurred. And then they cast their nets a third time.
The afternoon was fading. The sun hung lower, casting long shadows across the water. They had what they had come for. Not fish, but something else. Something inexplicable. The image sat in the boat between them, head and body fitted together, wrapped again in cloth. But the governor's banquet still needed fish. Their families still needed food. Work was not finished. One more cast. Juan threw the net, the familiar motion, the spread, the sink, the weight. He gripped the rope and began to pull. Immediately, he felt the difference. Weight, real weight, not the dead resistance of a statue or the emptiness of water. This was movement, life. He pulled harder. The net came up heavy, bulging, straining. Fish, not one or two, not a modest catch. The net was full, packed, overflowing. They hauled it aboard and the fish spilled across the bottom of the boat, silver bodies thrashing, gasping, feeling every available space. They cast again, full. Again, full. The boat sat lower in the water. The catch was so abundant they feared the weight would swamp them. If they pulled in one more netful, they might actually sink. Father Villela, the parish priest of Guaratinguetá, would later write in the church records that the fishermen caught so many fish they feared their boats would capsize and ceased fishing, marveling at the success. All afternoon, they had pulled empty nets, hour after hour, nothing. And then, after the image came aboard, everything changed. It was impossible to miss the connection. These were not superstitious men. They were practical, working fishermen. But they were also Catholics living in a time and place where the presence of God in the world was not a metaphor, it was reality. And reality had just demonstrated in the most tangible way that something sacred had occurred. The parallel was obvious to anyone who knew Scripture. In the Gospel of Luke, the disciples fished all night and caught nothing. Jesus told them to cast their nets one more time. They obeyed, and the catch was so great that their nets began to break. Here, on the Paraiba, centuries later, the same pattern repeated. Empty nets, prayer, an encounter with the sacred, and then abundance. They rowed home as the sun set, the boat heavy with fish and the image wrapped carefully at the bow. The governor would have his banquet. But more importantly, Brazil had just received a gift.
Felipe Pedroso was the oldest of the three fishermen. By unspoken agreement, the image came home with him. His house was simple, a dwelling typical of poor families in colonial Brazil. Packed earth floor, walls of wattle and daub, a hearth for cooking, not much else. But Felipe cleared a corner and built a small altar. Rough wood planks, a cloth, candles made from beeswax that he purchased, an expense but necessary. He placed the image there, head and body held together now by a simple adhesive, melted beeswax, carefully applied to the break. It was fragile, the head tilted forward slightly, the weight not quite balanced, but it held. Word spread quickly through the village. The fishermen had found something in the river, an image, Our Lady. And there had been a miracle, the fish, the impossible catch. People came. On Saturday evenings, neighbors gathered in Felipe's home. They knelt on the dirt floor and prayed the rosary together. They sang the office of the Immaculate Conception, the hymns and prayers devoted to Mary. Simple people, unpolished voices, but sincere. The image was too precious to leave exposed all the time. Felipe built a wooden chest, a simple box with a lid, and during the week he kept the image inside, protected. On Saturdays, he would open the chest and place the image on the altar for veneration. This went on for 15 years. 15 years of Saturday night rosaries, 15 years of candles burning, 15 years of the image remaining in a fisherman's home, in a corner of a simple house, drawing neighbors and strangers alike. And during those 15 years, things happened.
The image remained in Felipe Pedroso's home for 15 years. 15 years of Saturday night rosaries, of candles burning, of neighbors gathering to pray. And during those 15 years, things happened that could not be easily explained. One Saturday evening, the usual gathering filled the small house. The image sat on the altar, illuminated by 2 beeswax candles. The night was calm, the air still. They were praying the rosary when suddenly both candles went out. Not a flicker, just darkness. Before anyone could move to relight them, the flames reappeared, by themselves. Both candles burning as steadily as before, as if they had never been extinguished. A woman named Silvana da Rosa had been about to fetch fire from the hearth. She never touched them. Everyone in that room saw it. The impossible rekindling. The stories began to multiply. A slave named Zacharias came to pray before the image. His wrists were bound in iron shackles, heavy cuffs meant to prevent escape. He knelt, he prayed. Not a memorized formula, just the raw plea of a man in chains. And according to multiple witnesses, the shackles broke. Not unlocked, they broke. The iron shattered. The chains fell away from his wrists. Zacharias was free. In 1862, a 3-year-old boy named Marcelino fell into the Paraiba River. The current was strong. He could not swim. His mother and sister saw him fall and dropped to their knees, crying out to Our Lady of Aparecida. Marcelino did not sink. He floated, truly floated, as if held by invisible hands, until rescuers could pull him from the water, unharmed. Stories like these spread beyond the village. People came from neighboring settlements, then from distant towns. They came asking for intercession, for healing, for help, and many left convinced they had received it. The devotion was no longer contained to one fisherman's home. By the early 1730s, it was clear that Felipe Pedroso's house could no longer accommodate the pilgrims.
By the early 1730s, it was clear that Felipe Pedroso's house could no longer accommodate the pilgrims. His son, Atanasio Pedroso, built a small chapel on the main road that passed through the area, the route used by triperos, the muleteers who carried goods between Sao Paulo and the mining regions. The chapel was simple, open-sided, with the image placed on a modest altar. Travelers stopped, they prayed, they left offerings. But the image remained largely unprotected. The chapel had no doors that locked, no walls to shield it from the elements or from hands that wanted to touch, to venerate, to feel the clay beneath their fingers. For years, the image sat in that roadside chapel, accessible day and night. And then Father Jose Alves Villela, the parish priest of Guaratingueta, decided that something more was needed. In 1745, 28 years after the image was found, Father Villela petitioned the Bishop of Rio de Janeiro for permission to build a proper chapel. Permission was granted. He chose a site on a hill called the Morro dos Coqueiros, the Hill of the Palms. It was elevated, visible from a distance. Travelers on the road could see it. People living in the valley could look up and know where the image rested. The chapel was built with the labor of the local community, parishioners, slaves, anyone who could contribute. It was not large, but it was dignified. Stone and wood, a proper altar, a place where the image could be venerated with the reverence it deserved. On July 26, 1745, the feast day of St. Anna, the Mother of Mary, the chapel was blessed and opened for public worship. Father Villela also did something else that year. He wrote down the story. Up until that point, the account of the image's discovery had been oral, passed from the fishermen to their families, from neighbors to pilgrims, retold in kitchens and on roads and in prayers. But Father Villela sat down with the fishermen, who were still alive at that time, and recorded their testimony in the parish registry. It is the first written documentation we have, and it is the reason we know the details, the names of the men, the locations, the sequence of events. Father Villela made one small mistake. He wrote the discovery happened around 1719. It was actually 1717. We know this because the Count of Asumar, the governor whose visit prompted the fishing trip, kept a detailed travel diary. And in that diary, he records staying in Guaratingueta for 15 days in October of 1717. But the error is minor. The essential facts remain.
The devotion continued to grow. By the 19th century, the small chapel was no longer sufficient. In 1888, a larger church was constructed, what is now called the Old Basilica, built under the direction of a priest named Father Joaquim do Monte Carmelo. It still stands today, on that same hill, a testament to the faith that began with 3 fishermen and a broken statue. But the story was far from over. In 1868, a young woman made a pilgrimage to Aparecida. Her name was Isabel, and she was not just any pilgrim. She was Princess Isabel of Brazil, heir to the imperial throne, daughter of Emperor Dom Pedro II. She came quietly, without fanfare, traveling from Rio de Janeiro into the interior. She came because she was desperate. Isabel had been married for several years to Prince Gaston de Orleans. The marriage was happy by all accounts, but there was a problem. Isabel could not conceive. Years passed, and there was no child, no heir. In a monarchy, this was more than a private sorrow. It was a dynastic crisis. Without an heir, the succession was uncertain. The future of the Brazilian Empire seemed precarious. Isabel had prayed. She had sought counsel. She had done everything that faith and medicine of the time could suggest. And finally, she decided to come to Aparecida. She knelt before the small, dark image. She made a promise. If she was granted the grace of motherhood, she would give to the image a mantle and a crown, symbols of royalty, tokens of gratitude. She returned to Rio, and she waited. The following year, she conceived. In 1875, her first son was born, Pedro de Alcántara. Then came Luis in 1878, then Antonio in 1881. 3 sons. The succession was secure. The prayers had been answered. Isabel did not forget her promise. She commissioned a crown, an exact replica of the imperial crown she would one day wear as Empress of Brazil, gold encrusted with jewels. It was not a small gesture or a symbolic token. It was the actual crown of royalty, crafted with the same care and expense as any crown placed on a human head. She also sent a mantle, rich blue velvet, embroidered in gold thread, lined with red silk. And she included a note, a small piece of paper, handwritten, that expressed something remarkable. I before you am a princess of the earth, and I bow, for you are the queen of heaven. I give you this poor gift, a crown equal to mine, and if I do not sit on the throne of Brazil, I beg that you sit on it for me and govern Brazil perpetually. Read that again. A princess, heir to the throne of an empire, acknowledging that she held power only temporarily and that true sovereignty belonged to Mary. And more, a prophetic gesture, because Isabel never did sit on Brazil's throne as empress. In 1889, the Brazilian monarchy fell. A military coup, backed by Republican factions, overthrew Emperor Dom Pedro II. The imperial family was exiled. Isabel, the heir, who should have been empress, left Brazil and never returned to power. But her crown remained on the head of Our Lady of Aparecida. It was as if she had known, as if in giving that crown and writing those words, she had already surrendered the throne to the only queen who could truly govern Brazil. The symbolism was not lost on the Brazilian people. A princess had knelt before a dark, broken image pulled from a river. A princess had given her crown to a fisherman's Madonna, and when earthly kingdoms fell, the heavenly queen remained.
On October 28, 1894, a group of men arrived in Aparecida. They were Redemptorist missionaries, members of the Congregation of the Most Holy Redeemer, founded by Saint Alphonsus Liguori. These particular priests and brothers had come from Germany, sent by their order to serve the growing shrine. The local diocese could no longer manage the volume of pilgrims. The devotion had spread beyond the region, beyond the province.
People were coming from all over Brazil. The sanctuary needed organization, structure, pastoral care. The Redemptorists took on that responsibility, and they did something else. They became historians. Fathers and brothers of the order began searching for documents. They interviewed elderly residents who remembered the old stories. They combed through parish records, civil registries, anything that might shed light on the origins of the devotion. Fathers like Giulio Brustaloni spent decades researching, compiling sources, writing the definitive histories. They established what could be known with certainty and what remained legend. But perhaps the most influential Redemptorist at Aparecida was not a historian. His name was Father Vitor Coelho de Almeida. Father Vitor arrived at the sanctuary in the mid-20th century, and he understood something essential. Devotion spreads not just through books and documents, but through prayer that people can participate in. He wrote a consecration prayer to Our Lady of Aparecida, based on a prayer by Saint Alphonsus, adapted for Brazil's patroness. And every day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that prayer was broadcast over Radio Aparecida. In homes across Brazil, in cities, in villages, in remote farms, families stopped what they were doing. They gathered around their radios and they prayed together, their voices joining with the voice coming through the crackling speakers, all of them united in consecration to Our Lady of Aparecida. Father Vitor's voice became familiar to millions. His daily broadcast became a ritual that shaped Catholic life in Brazil for decades. He died in 1987, but the tradition he established continues. The 3 o'clock consecration is still prayed daily at the National Sanctuary, still broadcast, still uniting millions in devotion to the patroness of Brazil. The Redemptorists turned Aparecida from a regional pilgrimage site to a national center of faith. They organized the liturgies, cared for the pilgrims, maintained the buildings, and perhaps most importantly, preserved and spread the story.
By the early 20th century, Brazil had several patron saints. There was St. Peter of Alcântara, officially declared patron by Pope Leo XII in 1826 at the request of Emperor Dom Pedro I. And there was Our Lady of the Conception, who had been declared patroness of Portugal and all its territories back in 1646. As a Portuguese colony, Brazil had inherited that patronage. But there was no official recognition yet of Our Lady of Aparecida specifically. That changed in 1930. The Brazilian bishops petitioned Rome. They asked Pope Pius XI to formally declare Our Lady of Aparecida the principal patroness of Brazil. Not secondary, not regional, principal. A painting of the image was commissioned and sent to the Vatican as a gift to the Pope. Pius XI kept it in his private study. After his death, it was transferred to the Vatican museums, where it remains today. You can see Our Lady of Aparecida in the Vatican, but the real celebration came the following year.
On May 31st, 1931, Brazil consecrated itself to Our Lady of Aparecida. The plan was straightforward. Bring the original image from Aparecida to Rio de Janeiro, the capital, for a great public ceremony. The Cardinal Archbishop of Rio, Sebastiano Leme, would lead the consecration. The image would travel by train. The journey from Aparecida to Rio should have taken about 8 hours, moving slowly and carefully with the precious cargo. It took nearly 24. The image was placed in a specially prepared railway car, a chapel on rails. An altar was constructed inside, surrounded by flowers. Bishops, priests, and members of religious orders traveled in the same car, keeping vigil. As the train moved south toward Rio, something unexpected happened. Word had spread that the image was coming, and at every station, every town along the route, crowds gathered. Not small groups, masses, thousands of people. The train had to stop, again and again and again. At each station, the doors opened, the image was brought to the window or carried out briefly so the people could see her. Priests gave blessings. The crowd pressed forward, some weeping, some kneeling.
some reaching out as if to touch her.
There were conversions. People who had not practiced their faith in years fell to their knees. There were reported healings, testimonies of graces received just from seeing the image pass. The journey that should have taken 8 hours stretched through the night and into the next day. When the train finally arrived at Central Station in Rio de Janeiro, the city was waiting. 1 million people. The streets were packed. Every available space, sidewalks, balconies, rooftops. People climbed trees and lampposts to see. Entire families, rich and poor, black and white, standing shoulder to shoulder. The image was carried from the station in an open car, moving slowly through the throng. The route had been planned in advance, but the press of the crowd made progress difficult. The destination was São Francisco de Paula Church in the old city center. A massive altar had been constructed in front of the church. The image was placed there, elevated so the people could see her. Cardinal Leme celebrated Mass, and then, surrounded by the entire Brazilian episcopate, all the bishops of the nation gathered in one place. He led the consecration. Queen of Brazil, save Brazil. Brazil is yours. It belongs to you. Save Brazil. The crowd repeated the words, 1 million voices. The sound echoed off the buildings, carried through the streets, rose into the humid Rio air. Even the government acknowledged the moment. Getúlio Vargas, the president of Brazil, a man not known for religious devotion, by many accounts an atheist, ordered state honors for the image, military salutes, official recognition of the significance of the event. It was the largest religious gathering Brazil had ever witnessed. After the ceremony, the image remained in Rio for several days, displayed for continuous veneration. Tens of thousands more came to pray, to see, to ask for intercession. And then she returned to Aparecida, back to the sanctuary, back to the hill where Father Vilela had built that first chapel nearly 2 centuries before. But everything had changed. Our Lady of Aparecida was no longer a regional devotion. She was the spiritual identity of an entire nation.
36 centimeters tall, terracotta, darkened by time and water. The iconography is the Immaculate Conception, Mary pregnant with Christ still in her womb, her hands folded in prayer, her belly rounded, the Christ child not yet visible to the world, hidden within her. But there are details that make this image unique. The hands are small, proportioned like a child's hands, not a woman's, intentional, a message of purity and innocence in the craftsmanship itself. The face smiles, gentle, warm, unusual in Marian imagery, where Mary is typically solemn, but here, for Brazil, she smiles. And the color. The river made her dark, nearly black. The original paint stripped away by years underwater. In a nation where slavery was still legal, where millions of African descent were enslaved, Our Lady appeared black. The people saw in that darkness themselves, the marginalized, the forgotten. But there's more. 3 races are represented in this one small statue. The European, in the Portuguese style and noble bearing, the African, in the darkened skin, the indigenous, in the flowers adorning her hair, a custom of native Brazilian women. White, black, indigenous. The 3 peoples who built Brazil united in one image. This was not accidental. This was providence speaking through clay and water. And the brokenness. The image came in pieces, separated, yet reunited. The break remains visible even now, a scar where head and neck were joined. Perhaps that too is the message. What is broken can be made whole. From broken pieces to the largest Marian sanctuary in the world. That is the Ark of Aparecida. 3 fishermen, Domingos Garcia, João Alves, and Felipe Pedroso, cast their nets in desperation and pulled up the impossible. A statue that should have stayed buried rose to the surface. A head lost in kilometers of rushing water found its way back. Fragments reunited. Blessings poured out. Today, the National Sanctuary receives millions of pilgrims every year, but the heart of it all is still a small, dark statue, 36 centimeters tall, broken and mended. Ordinary clay transformed into a vessel of grace. The message is simple. God works through the impossible, through the humble, the forgotten, the discarded. A river that should have buried the image gave it back. Fishermen who should have caught nothing pulled up everything. A princess gave her crown to a darker queen, and a nation found its mother. Our Lady of Aparecida, Queen of Heaven, Mother who prays, who smiles, who intercedes. The fishermen understood it first, and their witness endures.
Thank you for watching. Catholic Hearts exists because of viewers like you. Subscribe to support our mission of bringing these stories to the world. And may the impossible faith of 3 fishermen remind you, nothing is beyond God's reach.